Okay, so today we're diving deep into the one thing that, well, everyone is fighting for in the digital age. Your attention.
Right. The one thing you can't make more of.
Exactly. It's the fundamental, non-renewable resource of the modern world. We took a stack of sources that really examine how this intrinsic human bottleneck, the fact that you only have a finite amount of focused energy to give structures everything, I mean everything from social platforms to market volatility. Your mission for this deep dive is pretty simple: to understand the core paradox of the information age. It's not about information abundance, it's about attention scarcity.
And that scarcity is what guarantees these massive winner-take-most outcomes.
We're going to give you the operational blueprint of the attention economy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're dealing with a system where there's just infinite data pouring out of our phones, but the processor handling all that, the human brain, it has biologically finite limits. This isn't just some economic theory, it's rooted in neurology.
It's biology.
And that fundamental conflict, it drives the shape of our entire digital lives. So we're going to trace that path. We'll start with those hard biological constraints, then move to the winner-take-most economic structure that results, and then finally look at the radical cultural shift that prioritizes the visual.
Let's start at the foundation then, the biology. If you think of attention as a kind of currency, it's not only limited, it's actually highly costly to spend. Sustained mental engagement is, well, it's literally expensive for your body to maintain. And here's the striking biological fact that just underscores this. While your brain is only about 2% of your body mass, sources like the work of Rachlin and Guznard show it consumes a staggering 20% of your body's total energy.
20%, even at rest.
Even at rest. So when you actively engage in effortful, focused thought like trying to solve a complex problem or even just ignoring distractions, that energy demand spikes even further. Focused thinking is draining.
That's the key constraint. And since attention is so metabolically costly, we are naturally hardwired to seek efficiency, to conserve that energy. We just can't afford to evaluate every single option, every source, every piece of data that comes our way. So because of this cost, we rely on shortcuts, what we call heuristics, to cut corners in decision-making.
Right.
You look for the familiar, you check what your friends recommend, or you gravitate toward the platform that's already organized the world for you. Those are all low-effort pathways. You're choosing the option that minimizes your cognitive load.
Not necessarily the one that's intrinsically superior.
Exact.
It's the ultimate trade-off, isn't it? Information is effectively free, but the mental labor to process it is still expensive.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to that classic quote that just summarizes the whole problem of the digital age, and it was delivered decades before social media. Herbert Simon, way back in 1971, he observed that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention.
That statement is just so prophetic. The constraint isn't storage or transmission capacity. The constraint is the human filter. And the moment that human attention becomes the limiting factor, it instantly becomes the most valuable commodity in the entire system.
And that takes us directly into the economic structure built on this scarcity, what we call the attention economy. If attention is the limiting resource, then the entire digital infrastructure is optimized to capture it, retain it, and, well, monetize that bandwidth.
Exactly. Digital platforms, whether it's a search engine, a social feed, a streaming service, they don't primarily sell content to you. They sell your attention, your focused time to advertisers.
That's the engine.
That is the core engine of the system. The algorithms aren't optimizing for your long-term fulfillment. They're optimized for resource retention. They just need to keep you clicking, scrolling, and watching to sell that scarce commodity.
And this scarcity immediately dictates a unique economic dynamic, which we see absolutely everywhere, the winner-take-most outcome.
Right. When a resource is finite, like attention, early concentration on an idea or a platform or even just a piece of content, it creates this massive self-reinforcing feedback loop.
A positive feedback loop.
A huge one. And it often marginalizes or just crushes competitors. The difference between the 50th most popular app and the 50,000th, it isn't linear. It's exponential.
Okay, let's unpack why that happens, because this is where that biological constraint meets the network effect. Visibility itself acts as this critical signal that radically reduces cognitive friction for later users. Think about it this way. If you're trying to solve a complex problem and you have, say, 10,000 possible solutions online, evaluating all of them is cognitively exhausting. It's impossible.
Right.
But if the top result has 1 million likes and the second has 10, the decision is instantaneous. It's effortless. You just default to the available one. Newcomers Facing that information overload, they don't have to evaluate every alternative.
They just look at what everyone else is doing as a proxy for value or for safety or relevance.
Right.
And this is what network scientists call preferential attachment. It's like a snowball rolling downhill. The popular gets more popular just because it's already popular.
So a few dominant systems, a few social platforms, a few search engines, they emerge and they just dominate.
And it's not necessarily because they are intrinsically better engineered than their competitors, but because they provide the lowest cognitive load for the user. They've standardized the experience, they've reduced the clicks, and they've earned the trust that lets you bypass any more mental effort.
But hold on, if the system just rewards popularity and low friction, does intrinsic quality matter at all? I mean, does the best idea just die because it requires too much thought?
That raises a really important question. Intrinsic quality might matter for initial success, but it becomes completely irrelevant if it fails to penetrate that attention bottleneck. The consequence for the majority of alternatives is stark. The famous long tail of content, the millions of niche products and platforms that exist, it's certainly there, but most of it remains functionally invisible.
Because finite human attention can't be distributed evenly across an infinite field.
It just can't. Those systems are available, but they're practically inaccessible to the average user because finding them requires too much cognitive effort.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Now we need to zoom out. From the individual human brain and platform economics to the behavior of the system as a whole. For decades, the intellectual ideal of progress was based on certainty. If you understood a market or an economy, you could plan, you could optimize, and you could predict success.
But that world is gone. The models of certainty just break down when systems become reflexive.
What does reflexive mean here?
It means that markets, social dynamics, investment platforms, they're all made of agents who observe the system, react to the system, and in doing so, instantaneously change the system.
So the act of knowing or observing alters the phenomenon itself.
It's a constant, dizzying feedback loop. Prediction fails, not necessarily because the models are wrong, but because the system is listening to the models being made about it, and it's reacting in real time.
You can actually trace this historical arc of information and just see the acceleration.
Absolutely. First, you had instinctual information. This was embodied knowledge all about survival with really fast feedback loops. Herd behavior was a simple, adaptive survival strategy.
Then, around the time of writing and printing, we entered the age of symbolic and scarce information. Knowledge was expensive to distribute, it was slow, and it was limited.
And planning worked perfectly in that environment.
It did, because the environment itself changed very slowly. This is the era where that classical formula for success, deep specialization, accumulating fixed assets, made perfect sense.
And then came the shift. Digital and abundant information. The cost of producing and distributing content just collapsed. AI is accelerating this even further, just generating massive amounts of content noise.
But all this abundance didn't lead to clarity or, reduced uncertainty.
No. When everyone has access to the same information instantly, collective, instantaneous reaction just overwhelms the quality of the content. Signals become noise almost immediately through imitation and overuse. That's the critical shift. The scarcity moves entirely to attention, and the hyper-speed fight for that attention creates massive volatility.
What's fascinating here is that this high-speed reflexive environment, it actually breaks down our traditional statistical tools. We enter what is often called a high-volatility or fat-tailed world.
And a fat-tailed system is one where outcomes are not defined by the average event, but by rare, extreme outcomes. The black swan events, the 100-year floods that happen every decade now.
Success and failure in this kind of system are just dominated by these arbitrary, extreme outliers.
Exactly. This is why success today so often feels arbitrary and unstable. An established edge is instantly copied and arbitraged away.
So if classical planning and prediction break down in this volatile world, how do you even survive?
This is where the source material pivots beautifully, bringing in the framework of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. The strategy shifts entirely. It moves from optimizing for success to prioritizing resilience and ruin avoidance.
So it's not about winning, it's about not losing.
Precisely. If you can't predict the system, the most important priority has to be to survive the bad outcomes it will inevitably throw at you. The question is no longer, how do I guarantee I succeed, but what would absolutely destroy me?
Right.
Think about classic corporate strategy. Optimization. That usually involves high leverage, specialization, overcommitment, all to increase efficiency and maximize returns.
But optimizing for success often simultaneously maximizes fragility.
It does. If a fat-tailed event hits, that highly optimized structure just breaks. The system rewards visibility and speed, but it brutally punishes dependence on stability.
So the rational response to this high volatility environment is a strategy of asymmetry. You have to position yourself to capture disproportionate positive upside while limiting your downside. This means making lots of small, limited bets where failure is cheap. It's survivable. You accept that 90% of these attempts are going to fail.
Because you know that the few rare successes will have open-ended upside enough to compensate for everything else.
It's a strategy of maximizing your options while minimizing your exposure to catastrophic loss.
That's the critical insight. This approach requires endurance over prediction. You must be able to withstand failure, because failure is the default state in a system with extreme volatility. And automation, AI, they only accelerate these dynamics. They make the environment more turbulent, not more legible or easy to forecast. Resilience, just avoiding ruin, is the absolute prerequisite for any success that lasts longer than a moment.
Now let's pivot and look at the most visible consequence of this intense struggle for attention, the massive cultural shift back toward visual primacy. And this isn't a coincidence. It's deeply rooted in the biology we talked about earlier. We are lookers and listeners first.
It's so crucial to remember that reading is not a natural human skill. It's a relatively recent, trained skill that repurposed brain regions that originally evolved for much faster tasks, like object recognition.
Right.
For millions of years, human cognition was dominated by oral, visual, and associative thinking.
So when technology, photography, radio, and film arrived, it was like a snap back toward our sensory comfort zones. Information became immediate, sensory, emotional, instead of relying on abstract decoding.
And print media immediately had to become more visual to compete.
Then television perfected this.
Yeah.
It required only passive attention, not effortful decoding or high training. This is where Marshall McLuhan's famous insight, "The medium is the message," holds such power.
The form of the medium isn't just a vessel for content. It fundamentally shapes our consciousness and social habits. Print fosters linear, hierarchical thinking. Visual media reshape our very perception.
The digital acceleration over the last 15 years has just been relentless, driven largely by the shift to the smartphone. That tiny screen triggered a total reconfiguration back to our evolutionary default. Images, motion, hyper-short micro-narratives.
And short-form video, think about the success of platforms like TikTok. It succeeded precisely because it aligns perfectly with the brain's need for rapid sensory input. It's low-friction information.
It also provided tools like filters and auto-cut music that made the creation process effortless.
Yes. The platform just bypasses the high-effort linear decoding required for text, trading intellectual control for immediate sensory gratification.
The profound implication of this return to the visual is felt most acutely, I think, in education. The old model of learning-heavy reading lists, static diagrams, hour-long lectures, it's designed for a print-based world that, well, it just doesn't exist anymore, outside of very specialized environments.
Children raised inside this highly visual, kinetic culture process information faster and more associatively. The new literacy requires interactive visuals, animations, multisensory explanations to communicate effectively.
Because the perceptual environment they inhabit demands it.
Exactly. We haven't become less capable. We've simply returned to the sensory modes that defined human cognition for millennia before the slow, high-friction technology of writing took hold.
So the final cultural reality is this. We are no longer a reading culture that occasionally watches. We are a visual sensory culture that reads only when absolutely required to do so. So what does this all mean? Putting all these pieces together, what's the ultimate takeaway? We trace the journey from that hard biological limit. The brain is 2% of the mass but demands 20% of the energy.
To the resulting economic structures of the digital platforms that create those winner-take-most dynamics.
And finally, we saw how that intense attention struggle drove our culture back towards sensory, low-friction information.
The final synthesis is that success today depends less on the intrinsic slow-burn value of an idea and much more on its ability to penetrate that narrow bottleneck of attention and secure a rapid, self-reinforcing feedback loop before its momentary relevance just fades.
The old success formula is effectively inverted.
Completely. Instead of optimizing for positive outcomes and stability, the key to surviving the modern world is reducing fragility and maximizing options, the ultimate defense against volatility.
And that leaves you with something to explore on your own. If the human brain is genuinely returning to its evolutionary sensory default prioritizing visual speed and associative thinking.
Is resisting this overwhelming cultural shift futile? Or is the capacity for sustained linear reading the last refuge of true intellectual control in an environment built on distraction?
That concludes this deep dive into the attention economy. Thank you for sharing your sources with us.